Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. On behalf of SCAPE team, I will be presenting the research loading dose about proposal writing. The objectives of this video is to identify the elements of a proposal and describe the content of the proposal sections. We have to always start by understanding where does proposal stand in the process of research or any project, or when do we need to start writing a proposal. Whenever you have any research idea or a project in mind, you have to start by doing a literature review to check that if your question is already answered and available in the literature, or you identify a gap in the literature that you decide to want to do a research about. So at this point, you will have a research question, and once you have a research question is ready, you can start writing the proposal. After that, you can do the following steps related to the research. But we have to understand that the proposal might change, or the elements might change depending on the purpose or the aim of the proposal, because the proposal may be applied for ethical approval, for institution approval, or even for funding purposes. And depending on that, maybe the fundamental elements of the proposal will be the same, but some requirements or some forms may vary depending on the institution and the purpose of the proposal. So focusing this video on the proposal, we have to understand first what is a proposal. A proposal is a blueprint, is a roadmap, is a guiding for what you will be investigating and why is it important and how will you be doing the research. It serves kind of a recipe that tells you step by step what to do in each step of the research, starting from the literature review until you get the result that you intend to get. So when we want to start writing a proposal, as I mentioned, it always starts with literature review. After you do the literature review, you have to identify the PICO question, which includes the research question. After that, we will write the background, which will mostly depend on the literature review that you did, and you will identify the rationale in there that helped you or guide you to reach the objective of this study. And then you will write the methodology in the details, and we will see in the following slides the elements of the methodology that is needed in a proposal. And after that, you will need to continue or complete the IRB forms or any forms required by the institution in addition to the proposal. Some institutions might have a proposal form already ready with the subsections that are needed, and others do not have a specific form for proposal. So we will talk about the general skeleton of any proposal. But we have to start first by identifying the PICO question. So the PICO, as you know, the P stands for patient or population, intervention, comparison, and outcome. And sometimes they call it PICOT because it includes time. If we apply these elements for a PICO question on one of the studies done by a SCAPE team, the evaluation of apixaban and effectiveness in morbidly obese patients with atrial fibrillation, I will apply this on the question that we had from the beginning for that study. So for patient, for example, we had adult patient who are at the age of 18 or above, diagnosed with non-valvular AFib, and who received apixaban for stroke prevention. So what is the intervention? It was, we did not have like two medications or medication uncontrolled, but we had two groups of patient population: non-morbid obese, who are we identified as BMI less than 40, and morbidly obese patient who had a BMI above or equal 40. The outcome that we were looking for was thrombosis and event, and we wanted to see, after receiving apixaban, a year after receiving apixaban, do they get this outcome or not? So we had the time limit in that question. Following that, if we had everything set in mind, we will be able to have the question ready. So following the same template of the PICOT, if we want to choose the intervention among those options that we have for a PICOT question, we will see that for the patient, we will fill it by adult patient with AFib receiving apixaban, non-morbid obese patients, morbid obese patients, or compared to morbid obese patient, affect affect receiving apixaban effectiveness and safety within 1 year. So we kind of filled the PICO element in that question, and we had the research question ready for us. So what do we need to do before starting the proposal writing? We need to have the PICO question set as we had it in the example before. We select relevant literature, and by relevant to our PICO question, similar in study, similar objectives, similar study design, and then read and understand what we gathered in the literature. It's important to not only gather it, but also it's not about regurgitation, it's about understanding and utilizing this information that we have from previous literature in order to identify the gap that we have or the rationale of our study, and then structure the sections outlined, structure the background and structure the methodology section. So overall, the proposal structure will have a title. It could be preliminary that you can change later on upon finalizing the manuscript. You will have an abstract. It's not necessarily has all the elements related to abstract, and some forums or some institutions had it as a study summary, and some even have like a summary with a lay language for non-health providers. How would you describe your study that you will be doing? And then you will have the introduction or the background, methodology, references, appendices if you have, and any ethical approval forms that you are required to fill. So in here we can have the checklist, some of the checklists related to an IRB form. And you can see like the first 3 elements related to the introduction, the objective, and results of previous literature are mainly part of the background or an introduction of any proposal, while all of the remaining elements, starting from the parameters to be measured, the resources, the study sites, the duration, are all related to the methodology. And you can see how extensive is the methodology section in a proposal. So if we want to start, if we always say that a manuscript is a kind of an hourglass structure, for those who listened to my previous video, actually a proposal is half an hourglass, because you only start with the introduction, which is broad, and then you go narrowing down to the methodology, but you don't have the results yet, or neither the discussion to generalize your results. So the structure of a background usually starts with an introduction that addresses the significance of the research. What is driving your research? Why this problem is significant? Why COVID is significant? Because it's killing millions of people, it's very contagious, it's affecting this and that, it's causing these complications. Previous search related addressed the question about the question that you had in the PICO, what research has been done already about that topic, and then you will have the hypothesis. What do you think that what are you going to compare in your study, and what do you think the effect would be? So we'd have it all in the background. For those who listen to my proposal background, for the background writing or the introduction writing in the manuscript, it is similar in the proposal. It's just maybe more extensive in a proposal than in a manuscript, for the reason that we have it written in extensive way, because when you write the manuscript, some of the studies that you would mention in details in the proposal background might be moved to the discussion section. As you can see, the outline is similar, but maybe for each section we might have more than 1 paragraph, 1 to 2, even sometimes 3. So it's the detailed literature review that after you did the detailed literature review and collect the relevant information, you will have the first paragraph or first 1 to 2 paragraph that introduce the topic and the importance of that topic. After that, you go to the research niche, where you define the specialized area of research, provide the background going over similar literature that looked into that same problem, and then describe the problem and what do you need to solve, why do you need to do this literature, what is the gap in the literature to do this research. You would, if you compare it to the proposal, to the background of the manuscript, is similar, but it's just more extensive than a manuscript. So here is an example of a proposal outline. You can see that the first paragraph would be about the prevalence, and first 1 to 2 could be about the morbidity, the complication related to COVID, and then the second paragraph about the nutritional requirement for any patient who are critically ill, and then discuss the finding of nutritional requirements specifically in patients who are with COVID and not only in the ICU. And then we can look at the findings and the gap or the rationale in the literature that drive the aim of this study. This is just an example of one of the SCAPE projects. So in the methodology, the purpose is to allow the study to be replicated and also evaluate what you do. So you can see that the sections of the methodology here are very extensive compared to the manuscript. But for the purpose of this video, I will focus on the study population inclusion-exclusion criteria and the outcome definitions, as this is the area where we can see a lot of mistakes, if we may call them. So if you have, we will also apply on the study of the evaluation of apixaban safety and effectiveness in morbidly obese patients done by SCAPE team. So since you had the PICO question ready, this can help you or guide you decide on the inclusion or exclusion criteria. So setting the PICO question, we know that we want to include patients who are at age of 18 or above, have a non-valvular AFib, so we want to exclude patients with valvular AFib, received apixaban for stroke prevention, so we want to exclude patients who received other than apixaban, or we want to exclude patients who received apixaban for other reasons other than stroke prevention. In terms of the comparison and intervention and comparison, we know that we're going to include any patient with any BMI less than 40 or above or equal 40 will be included. For the timing, we know that we want to look at the apixaban effect a year after the initiation, so we want to exclude any patient who received or we see the effect or we see the outcome in them after 1 year. We also have other factors to consider, confounders to consider in inclusion or exclusion, from either from previous literature, what they found, or confounders. Like we know that apixaban is contraindicated in patients with severe liver dysfunction. So we know that one of the exclusion criteria will be liver cirrhosis. For example, mechanical valve affect the anticoagulation or valvular, so that's why mechanical valve patient or patient with valvular AFib will be excluded. Also, renal function affect the dosing of apixaban and indication, so we might exclude a patient who has serum creatinine above 1.5. Other high-risk populations, such as patients with high CHA2DS2-VASc score, will be at high risk of stroke, while Has blood will be a risk for bleeding. So we might, even if it's not included in the inclusion or exclusion criteria, it might be a confounder that we adjust for example, by propensity score. So the study outcome, the objective is usually we express it in a verb. It's involved the intent to do something with data derived from the outcome. While the outcome, it's actually a measure, a data that can be measured and gathered that used to evaluate the protocol. So the outcomes are usually expressed in quantifiable units or with noun. Endpoints could be other confoundings or other measurement analyzing parameters that could support the outcome in finding, and we'll give an example later on in the same study that we were applying the PICO question. So translating the outcome, as you can see here, the objective was of that study is to evaluate the effectiveness and safety of using apixaban in morbidly obese patients with non-valvular AFib. So how did we identify effectiveness? It was the occurrence of thrombotic events, and secondary outcomes for safety was bleeding. And then we should have a clear definition of what do we mean by thrombosis and how do we need to identify it. Is it by physician documentation, or we need to go to radiographic assessment in order to confirm that the patient has thrombosis? With bleeding, same thing. How are we going to identify bleeding? If we have major and clinically relevant non-major bleeding, how do you want to identify them? After that, we will know what are the relevant variables or the endpoints that we need to collect. For example, for major bleeding, we need hemoglobin. We need to see if there is RBC transfusion. We need to include signs related to bleeding and write them down as a list, and have also symptoms related to bleeding and have them listed down. As you can see here, we have additional sections. Usually we don't have those in details in the manuscript, but we have them in the proposal. We also need to include the work plan and the timeline. Here is an example of a work plan starting from the literature review until the manuscript writing. Here is another example for a timeline. We also need to remember to fill the IRB, the institution. If we're talking about a proposal that we are only using for ethical approval, for obtaining ethical approval, then we need to check what are the forms that are required by the institutional review board. And sometimes they require also the CV and the ethical training certificate. And here are examples for obtaining the ethical, the sources of obtaining ethical training. For general tips for a proposal, stay focused to the point, to the research question, make the document concise and specific, to the point, include the key studies, don't include all the literature review, break up the large blocks in the text into either paragraphs or even include subheadings. Make sure that the method, when you write it, it's in the future tense because we're describing what we're going to do. Here are also some tips for the formatting of the proposal and extra resources that you can refer to it, and I also used in preparing the material of this video. And additional writing resources I also provided in the manuscript writing, similar to them. Here are the same. I hope you will find this video beneficial. Thank you so much for your time. Until I see you again in a future research loading dose video.